es a las 12:30. A las 12:30 vamos a empezar, pero sí se puede, así que échenle. Yes, we can. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Un sí se puede, a ver. ¿Sí se puede? ¿Sí se puede? ¿Sí se puede?
¡Sí se puede!
¿Sí se puede?
¡Sí se puede!
Welcome to our news conference. I am Angel Garcia with Californians for Pesticide Reform and also member of the coalition advocating for pesticide safety out of Tulare County. I have the pleasure of being your host today. Most of us gathered here today are from different parts of California where Telone use is the greatest. California's southern San Joaquin Valley and the Central Coast regions. Telone, or 1,3-dichloropropene, is a highly drift-prone carcinogenic and the third most heavily used pesticide in the state, with more than 12 million pounds used per year. In 2018, we had the highest levels ever recorded in Shafter and Parlier. The last time the levels were high, but lower than in 2018, there was a state ban of 5 years. Yet, nothing has been done to mitigate the risks this time. Today, we are here because it is imperative to include the voices of communities most affected by this chemical and to urge the Department of Pesticide Regulation to prioritize communities' health now. At today's DPR hearing, we heard from community residents on the need to implement immediate restrictions that are truly health protective. We are calling for all Telone applications to be covered by specialized tarps, include larger buffer zones around treated fields, and a reduction in Telone usage, among other things. DPR and Dow have a long, shady history of compliance. After the chemical was banned in 1990, Telone was reintroduced in 1995 under new regulations, including an annual usage cap that was created by the very same company that manufactured it, Dow AgroSciences. A new rule followed this, which allowed applicators to roll over their unused allocations from prior years, and it became known as a practice known as a banking system. Additionally, under the new rule, the applicator was able to apply for a waiver from the cap to be able to use more Telone, and not surprisingly, such waivers were often granted. Does this sound fair to you all?
No!
Since when do you let the wolf guard the sheep? Thanks to the work of public health advocates and community leaders, DPR ended the Telone rollover banking system and waiver granting, but not without revising their method for calculating cancer, which allowed an increase in use from 90,000 to 250,000 pounds to 136,000. Just last year, a Superior Court judge in Alameda County found that DPR did in fact give Dow regulatory authority, which subsequently made DPR start on a rulemaking process expected to be completed by the summer of 2020. With leadership from the Newsom administration, we look at DPR to put our community's health over profits. Time is up, Dow, or Cortiva, or whatever you want to be called. We are the future, but we are also the present. I would now like to welcome our first speaker, Jesus Mendoza, resident of Fresno, and also a community organizer with the Central California Environmental Justice Network. Let's give him a round of applause.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon everyone. ¡Sí se puede!
¡Sí se puede!
Thank you. So one of the things we're here because we're concerned as people in Fresno County, Kern County. The Central Valley happens to be impacted largely by these pesticides. These pesticides that are, yes, boom! These pesticides are not only taking away futures and lives, but also they're taking up our environment. What future are we thinking about? Especially when our children are not being able to fully develop their brains being able to stay competent in this challenging future that they face. Now, the thing is for us, like say for example in Parlier, having the highest concentration of Telone, and without the community knowing what's hitting them. The thing is, we as community, we as farm workers, because yes, I am from a farm worker background. We come from the farm working fields. And the idea is that my parents as farm workers, they have invested in us, and we must continue the fight and bring the fight to here, where the powers of structures are, and not let Dow take over the narrative of what's more important. They think that profits are more important than people. I say not. Are profits more important than people? So therefore, we are here today to make sure that leadership in California does not follow the footsteps of the national leadership, where they bow down to companies, selfish, and just big corporations like Cortiva or Dow that are trying to impose their profits, their own benefit over the lives of people who are hardworking and trying to build a future for everybody. The future of California looks very colorful. We must make sure that we do provide a safe and sustainable path for these future generation and leaders to really get the chance to come out here. So thank you. Sí se puede.
¿Sí se puede?
¡Sí se puede!
¿Se puede?
¡Se
¿Se
puede!
puede? Our next speaker is Ann Catton from California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. She is an industrial hygienist and has worked on pesticide policy for 30 years. Let's give her a round of applause.
Good afternoon. We're extremely concerned about the past exposures to people who live and work in areas where there's been high use of Telone in the 1980s, and then since it was brought back in 1995. We can't undo those exposures, which is all the more reason that DPR needs to move forward with very strict mitigations now and concentration on helping to develop and implement non-fumigant alternatives that are healthier for people and healthier for the soil. The TIF tarps, which we are proposing, should be used on all applications. They are expensive, but they also, because they keep the fumigant from off-gassing, they allow use of lower application rates, and that will certainly be of help. We are also strongly proposing that all buffer zones and other mitigations be based on the level of 55 parts per billion, which the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment has supported to account for uncertainties and extrapolating from animal studies and other weaknesses in the data. There were some comments from the industry today that there have only been a few large levels monitored this year, but we have to keep in mind that there is only scattered areas where monitoring occurs, and we know that there are many other areas of high use where we expect there also are very high levels of exposure that need to be controlled. And finally today, we urge DPR to restore the previous level of protection against cancer of 0.14 parts per billion, which they revised against the recommendations of OEHA. They revised it stating that, well, it could be this level or it could be higher, and it's always in that sort of situation you need to choose the more protective level for an adequate public health approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Our next speaker is Bianca Santoyo. Bianca Santoyo is an organizer with the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, and she is from the community of Arvin. Bianca Santoyo.
good afternoon. My name is Bianca Santoyo and I work for Center to Raise Poverty in the Environment as a community organizer emphasizing the pesticide. And we're here to make a change, to speak loud for the state agencies to listen to us that we are being poisoned day by day with all these chemicals, especially Telone being an air toxic contaminant, and yet nothing has been done. We've been working with the community of Shafter with the 617, which is an air emission program, and we are pushing to have Telone being tarp in the valley. Why? Because there was high levels of Telone in record that are by a contaminant, and that does a permanent damage. We were supposed to have one of the residents from Shafter that have been affected tremendously from Telone, and unfortunately she's a caregiver and her patient just yesterday died of cancer. So it's another number to put in the list for DPR to listen to us of what's going on in the valley and how it's affecting us tremendously day by day. How many deaths have to happen before they listen to us? We really want to make it very clear that all these chemicals are here to harm us, and we want to stop. We have people driving from 6 hours away from here to come and have a voice for this state agency to listen to what we're saying. We want a safe community. We want a safe environment. And all this is harming us day by day. Thank you.
So before we wrap it up, I just want to re-energize us and give a shout out to your community. Antes de concluir esto, me gustaría que pues le inyectáramos más energía y terminar en una nota alta. So, when I say community, you say presente. Así que cuando yo digo alguna comunidad, ustedes digan presente. Y si se me olvida, ustedes grítenlo. ¿Va? Tulare.
Presente.
Fresno.
Presente.
Merced.
Presente.
Monterrey.
Presente. Oxford. Presente. Presente.
Ventura.
Presente.
Oxnard.
Presente.
Salinas.
Presente.
Watsonville.
Presente.
Marlier.
Presente.
Eso.
Presente.
Soledad.
Presente.
Guadalupe.
Presente.
Qué bonito se escucha.
¿Sí
¿Sí se puede?
se puede?
¿Se puede? ¿Sí se puede?
¡Sí se puede!
Thank you, folks. This concludes this press conference, and you have a restful day. You guys.
For farm workers!
Thank you to our farm workers. Exactly.
Without them, we don't eat.
Right! Say it again!
Because without farm workers, we don't eat. I like food.
I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I cannot get over how many people are here on like a week and a half's worth of notice who drove all the way from Ventura, from Kern, from Tulare, from Monterey, from Fresno. This is unbelievable. It's from
Bueno, dice, buenas tardes a todos, buen provecho. Sara dijo aquí que no puede creer que todos estemos aquí cuando apenas nos dieron 1 o 2 semanas de noticias de que iba a pasar la audiencia y que tengamos a tantos líderes de toda la región presentes aquí hoy.
And what I think the last time we were here, it was not about Telone, right? It was about some pesticide I'm going to forget the name of, I hope, in 2 years, right? Purify, right?
Y la última vez que estuvimos aquí, hasta ya se nos está olvidando el nombre del pesticida del que venimos, ¿no? Y que ya queremos olvidarlo, y ese es el pesticida de clorpírifos.
Who here worked on chlorpyrifos?
¿Quién trabajó en clorpírifos?
All right.
Thank you.
Sacramento about chlorpyrifos.
¿Quién vino a Sacramento de
All right. Who joined a rally or a press conference in your local area? All right. Who signed petitions and letters and talked to your neighbors?
¿Quién?
So why is chlorpyrifos going to be gone in California?
So, ¿por qué clorpírifos se va a ir de California?
It's because of you.
Es
It's
por
because
ustedes.
of you. All the work that you did, the communities that you work with.
Trabajando con las comunidades.
So we're here not just to tell DPR again about another pesticide that should be banned, which we will get banned.
So, no estamos aquí para decirle a DPR que tiene que eliminar este pesticida, que lo vamos a eliminar.
We're here to celebrate our victory on chlorpyrifos.
Estamos aquí para celebrar nuestra victoria de clorpírifos.
And we are going to have a long-term victory. We know none of us want to be here on a pesticide by pesticide basis, right?
Right.
I'm so happy. I was so impressed with everyone's comments.
Sorry, I'm like, y sabemos de que no vamos a terminar aquí, no queremos regresar por un pesticida y otro pesticida, queremos aquí estar para eliminar todos, pero también estaba muy impresionada por todos los comentarios que todos y todas hicieron el día de hoy.
So we are going to win. Sí se puede.
Vamos a ver.
Yay. In celebration of the banning of chlorpyrifos, we have a chlorpyrifos ban cake.
Para celebrar la cancelación de clorpírifos o la eliminación de clorpírifos, tenemos un pastel.
Yeah. So we're going to be cutting it up, but if you want to take a picture of it, it has a nice giant crossed out chlorpyrifos on it.
So, ahorita lo vamos a cortar, pero si quieren tomarle una foto, tiene una tacha en el nombre de clorpírifos.
I love the leg.
I know, right?
I forgot about this.
Morning, Jim Baxter. I am Dow's Global Regulatory Leader for 13D Soil Fumigant. Pleased to be here this morning. 13D soil fumigant products are strictly regulated in California, significantly more restrictive than anywhere in the country. The department has been cautious in setting special California-only restrictions that have supported the safe and effective use of the products throughout the state. There is a very high degree of confidence in the extensive toxicology database for this molecule, and when applied in normal risk assessments, there's a high degree of confidence that human health is protected with wide margins of safety. While we believe additional measures are unnecessary, we recognize the department's authority to set screening levels for 13D. However, while DPR's acute screening level for 13D in air is 110 parts per billion, the current national value is over 20 times higher at 2,500 parts per billion. So if I could use an analogy, if the national speed limit using the 2,500 parts per billion reference is 70 miles per hour, then California's speed limit is using that 110 reference is 3 miles per hour. The measured value at 111 parts per billion in Parlier equates to 3.1 miles per hour. This single 111 part per billion value is the only measurement out of more than 3,000 samples that is above the screening level. Use of 13D on California crops produces an estimated economic benefit of $234 million per year and over 2,700 jobs in the state, most of which, $88 million, support workers in rural communities. 13D has a strong a long track record of safe and effective use in all the major California growing regions. Let me conclude by saying we appreciate the opportunity to participate in the process, and we look forward to sharing more detailed comments as the process continues.
Good morning. My name is Renee Pinnell. I'm here on behalf of the Western Plant Health Association. We'd like to thank DPR for the presentation this morning and the opportunity to comment at this workshop. WPHA has a number of concerns about the apparent path DPR is taking in relation to 1,3-D. We have several concerns and we look forward in the future for DPR to answer them. We would like to start off with, when did screening levels become regulatory targets? I don't know how many people were present back in the original monitoring programs back in the early 2000s, back at Parlier, but I was. And I sat in every one of those community meetings back then when the community was explained what a screening level was. And the explanation was that screening levels are indicators of additional investigation that needs to take place. I haven't heard anything about the investigation of this 111 detection. So, 111 and 110 seems like we're within that scope of verification that needs to take place. And so while I don't want to discount, because we appreciate DPR's commitment to maintaining and protecting public health, we would like to hear more about the verification that 111 parts per billion detection is verifiable. That would require an additional investigation. And again, where is the investigation? To point out that even with the 3 detections that DPR noted during your presentation, 2 out of the 3 are well below the detection point for even the most conservative 55 parts per billion. So to move to a statewide regulation based on a 1 part per billion exceedance seems like an extreme step. And again, I guess this comes back to why is a 1 part per billion triggering a statewide promulgation of a regulation as opposed to perhaps an investigation into a local exceedance. So I guess this kind of leads to a bigger question as to what is DPR's ultimate goal on this regulation and this chemical? Because it seems like this race to do this more extreme statewide regulation does not fit the situation that we're seeing right now. We haven't heard anything about a local regulation, increased permitting by an ag commissioner where this is taking place, as opposed to jumping to the one-size-fits-all state regulation that could be coming. So we look forward to hearing from DPR as far as what those steps are. It would seem like the natural path forward on a one-time detection as opposed to a statewide regulation for a product that has, again, 1 exceedance of 1 part per billion over, 10, 12 years of monitoring that has taken place. We look forward to further discussions with DPR, and especially at a time when more agricultural members can participate.
I want to respond just to one point of that, which is that we presented on the investigation of the 111 part per billion concentration at our April pesticide registration and evaluation committee meeting. Those materials are on our website, but we can point to those on the same webpage that this workshop was included on to help address that. I'm also going to take a break, and we've received a couple of clarifying questions that I just want to raise that might be helpful for the general audience. Which is, can you clarify the difference between the buffer zone proposal that you were referring to and the current restriction that no occupied structures are allowed within 100 feet for 7 days? Will these be one and the same under the new buffer zone proposal?
So yes, essentially we are looking at, if we go with a minimum buffer zone distance to an occupied structure of 200 feet, for example, and we also go with a minimum buffer zone distance of 200, like one of the examples that I showed, that will be one of the same. Otherwise, there might be a difference of buffer zone depending on how large the bystander buffer zone may be. Again, that's, that's yet to be determined. So, can you repeat the question?
And then also, for clarification, if the buffer zone applies only to occupied structures or exclusion of all non-handlers.
So the way that, again, the modeling scenarios was looking into, we basically have an exclusion area that we are considering. There's nobody present for whether it was a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, or 6 days within that minimum buffer zone distance.
My name is Carl Eidsap, and I work for the Walnut Commission and Board, and I am the Regulatory and Technical Support Director for our industry. Our industry is comprised of 4,800 walnut growers, 85 processors, which we call handlers. We employ indirectly and directly 80,000 people in California throughout the state. And our farm gate value from last year was $880 million. The year before it was $1.6 billion value. Last year our growers, they had a tough year, and hopefully it won't be that tough this year. But on record, the Commission and Board oppose further restrictions on Telone for walnut fumigation. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a grower. We have a grower here to talk about that more in depth, but I'm a pragmatist, and I don't believe in trying to fix what's not broken. And we don't believe the current Telone fumigation schedule is broken. Walnut trees last 35 to 40 years. You only get one chance to fumigate, and they fumigate for one particular nematode that if that grows, it will stifle the orchard. The trees will not grow well, there will be no yield, and that's forever. In the past with pesticides, when they're being regulated out of existence, growers could say, okay, I can't spray, I'll probably get 3 or 4 more % insect damage, or we can compensate with other active ingredients. With this, there's no compensation. You're done. You cannot replant with nematodes in the ground without first killing them. This would be a horrible legacy to have from DPR, and we oppose further restrictions because it could lead to the decline of the walnut production, which has been growing for 20 years, and actually it could lead to the demise of the industry for generations to come if this Telone is taken away without a commercial replacement that's able to be used by growers. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for letting us speak here to you today. My name is Christy Toronto, and I'm a member of SAS, Safe Ag, Safe Schools in Salinas, California, and I'm here on behalf of my community and also as a parent. I had the experience of having a child that was diagnosed with cancer, and we spent quite a lot of time up at Stanford. And it was my experience that during the time there, we were told by many people there, both the doctors, nurses, janitors, transportation, people who registered us, very subtly over 8 to 9 years, made the comment, we sure get a lot of kids from your area. Now, if this was absolutely not harmful at all, we wouldn't be here. It might be working, but it's probably just working in terms of monetary value to the people who are benefiting that way. What I would suggest is looking at the massive amounts, 2 million pounds of Telone. It is a Proposition 65 listed carcinogen. It has at one time been banned for 5 years. And then with the amounts that for the air quality amounts now have shown that they've surpassed those amounts before the 5-year ban, but the DPR has done nothing. And so on behalf of the children whose developing bodies are more impacted, Bush and Clinton in the Clean Air Act looked at, in the 90s, looked at 40 chemicals and said these 40 chemicals are affecting our children. The EPA then went to bat for us then, and they were held up in court by the chemical companies and the farmers. Now, to be naive to the point of ignorance to say that chemicals are not dangerous, especially in the numbers we're talking about. Fresno, 1,978,721 pounds. You can't say it's absolutely safe because as we've heard, it depends on how much water is in the soil. It depends on whether there's tarps. It depends on buffer zones. So I would ask you to have the moral courage and the ethical will to do right by the farming communities, by the children who live there, the farm workers who are at ground zero there in the fields themselves, and truly look at this and judge on behalf of the amounts that were safe before. The chemical hasn't done anything else to change. It's the same chemical. It was banned for 5 years. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Woody Rehannick. I'm with Safe Ag, Safe Schools in Watsonville. Strawberry country, a lot of communities and schools in outlying areas where Telone is applied. And it's not applied by itself. The elephant in the room here is that DPR's proposed mitigation measures for Telone, with all due respect, are flawed because they only consider Telone in isolation and not in combination with other pesticides, simultaneously or sequentially. In real-world scenarios, particularly farming communities like ours, farm workers and residents are exposed to chemical cocktails of contaminants in our food chain, water cycle, soil, air, clothing, cookware, you name it. Now, this is not mass hysteria, this is daily living facts. These cumulative impacts of multiple exposures and multiple chemicals over time are not being measured with Telone in your studies. The UCLA School of Law's case study, Exposure and Interaction, the Potential Impacts of Using Multiple Pesticides, which I believe came out last year, examines 3 fumigants in Ventura during summer 2013. This case study of 3 fumigants, Telone, chloropicrin, methyl salts, commonly applied together in California, demonstrates that these pesticides may interact to increase the health risk for California farm workers and residents. I'm quoting this study now for the next page or so, probably till I'm done. Workers and residents are regularly exposed to 2 or more of these simultaneously, and this is the study saying DPR does not regulate the application of multiple pesticides to prevent or decrease risk to human health despite having authority to do so. The case study of Telone, chloropicrin, and methyl salts fumigants suggests that there are interactions of these 3 that may, 1, decrease the body's ability to detoxify, 2, attack and damage DNA, and 3, disable DNA repair and expression enzymes. And they go into detail on what that means. Now, this was a team of scientists. 6 of them authored this study. I hope you're aware of it. And because taken together, these 3 possible interactive effects would result in greater likelihood of unrepaired mutations and or uncontrolled cell growth. Here's the kicker. This would potentially increase the likelihood of cancer. This is still the study speaking, not me. This presents a serious health concern because Californians are regularly exposed to these pesticides simultaneously or in quick succession. Low-income and minority residents bear the greatest risk. So this becomes an environmental and it becomes an environmental justice issue.
Yes, hi, my name's Hal Crane. I'm a walnut grower, processor, and packer, part of a family operation that is the growers, packers, and processors of walnuts. I'm also a co-chair for the Walnut Board's Production Research Advisory Council. So that's my background. I'd like to propose a few ideas that are hopefully seen as a rational compromise towards an end goal that is being sought here. And one concept would be the idea that if it's determined that there's a problem with an exceedance, and the example cited was Parlier and Shafter, the concept of maybe further limiting the applications during critical times in those areas may attain the benefit in the short term, while we're going to work on some alternatives that I hope to speak about in just a moment. It's a huge state. I don't want to cause problems for the people in that area that are needing to apply the product, but I'm some 300 miles away from there, and in my area, I've never heard of any issues with exceedance or even approaching that level. So I hope that you'd at least give that consideration while we're working to try to come up with some solutions and alternatives. The second thing I'd like to do is would ask and implore that you do not regulate this product out of existence, practically out of existence, being by the excessive cost to make it to where we can't use it, until we can come up with an alternative. So I use the insecticide comparison. If a navel orangeworm is attacking my crop and a product is outlawed or made practically unusable through regulatory problems, I can come up with alternatives and figure out how to minimize the damage and still make a clean, non-insect infested crop that I can deliver to the consumer. I don't have that alternative with Telone. If there's lesion nematodes in my soil, I cannot replant an orchard. The existence of those, it's not a game changer, it's a game breaker. That's why the consequence for the walnut industry is so dramatic on this. We have no alternatives. Would like to point out the industry through grower funding, we're paying for research, trying through the breeding program to develop resistant rootstocks, and that is in process, and there's a lot of strides being made. I'd ask that we have time and hopefully get your support on trying to continue that. That would be a beneficial result for everybody in this towards the end goal. Also, we're funding alternative soil fumigation methods research, and I personally am partaking in those and very active and proactive trying to come up with solutions. Would implore you, please, we need time, we need your support. Let's leave a legacy of the DPR and for the farmers that we're proactive and working on a solution together. Let's join together and work as a team to solve the problem and not work against each other.
Good morning, Joe Grant, Research Director for the California Walnut Board. Well, to the good comments that Carl and Hal have made, I would just add an additional point. Tree crops in general, and walnuts in particular, are very deep rooted and need mitigation, control of this pest down to 5 or 6 feet. Even under the best circumstances, the current material, under the current restrictions at rates and methods of application, we don't get good control in most cases. The soil conditions of temperature and moisture that are required to get good efficacy, it's rare to be able to achieve those, so we're always compromising with suboptimal efficacy. We need more time, as Carl and Hal mentioned, we're working on alternatives, we're spending a lot of money on developing alternatives, but there is no effective alternative to this product at the current time, and we would plead with you to provide us more time to work as we have been diligently to develop alternatives. We'll put them into place, and we hope we'll be in better shape.
So, Kathleen Kilpatrick, I'm a retired school nurse from Watsonville. I also credentialed as a family nurse practitioner, studied occupational and environmental health risk assessment and all that went with it as a master's student at the University of Washington. I have a few points. I'll try and cover them all as quickly as possible. The risk characterization document, I was concerned about how old all the studies were. 20, 30 years old, most of them, and I didn't have time to look it up, but it seemed like a lot of them were done by Dow and other members of the chemical industry. As usual, DPR is looking at a narrow window, acute bystanders, short-term exposures only. I'm a little concerned about that worker that takes off the tarp, the one that got the hardest hit. There was also, as other people will and have mentioned, no addressing cumulative exposures, multiple fumigants, other chemicals, including other pesticides that are carcinogenic, and arsenic and chromium-6, which all tend to be present in higher amounts in the same communities. You also, as usual, relied on modeling because you don't have enough monitors out there. Mitigation options, yes, to all the most stringent. We would hope that you wouldn't lower any. There was one thing that was missing from your mitigations, which is any kind of notification plan for people who live in the area. Because it is a toxic air contaminant and a carcinogen, and the neighbors deserve to know. But I would also just like to address the whole assumptions of risk assessment and risk management, since I subscribe to the precautionary principle, as you probably might have guessed. Weighing the acceptable level of human health risks against cost and feasibility is a flawed assumption. And really, when you do risk assessment, you do alternative assessment, and you only looked at mitigation. You didn't really look at the alternatives. There are alternatives that are, as the Walnut grower suggested, for different forms of fumigation, and that's a vital component of a risk assessment. And they are being developed, and they do have similar efficacy and cost profiles. And just looking at only human health effects, not enough in our climactic conditions. Fumigants are all greenhouse gases. Sterile soil is not effective in sequestering carbon. And so we have to look at the overall environmental impacts as well. I live in a valley full of strawberries. The berry industry is teetering on the edge of destruction, although most people don't know it yet. But that monocropping and the high input agriculture, it's just not sustainable. The loss of fumigants as a tool might accelerate the decline of the berry industry, but it won't be the only cause, and in some ways it's a contributor. So we need to look at other alternatives, and we need to incentivize them.
So from Laura Rosenberger-Heider, has the comment to decrease the volume of 1,3-D pesticide allowed to be applied since the diminishing federal air quality protections and the increase in hydraulic fracturing with its pollution and the concentration of pollutants in water in Central Valley due to climate change. We had a clarifying question on what will be the impacts to currently established buffer zones for combined products such as chloropicrin and 1,3-D. Will the buffer zones be determined based on the chloropicrin active ingredient part of the product or 1,3-D? And we would take the same approach as what we've done for other combination products in the past, which is that the most stringent requirements would apply for combination products based on the amounts of AI in each. Also received a question and comment from Scott Stoddard with UCA&R. A standard application of Telone for sweet potatoes is 10 gallons per acre, about 100 pounds of AI per acre. And would this mean that the new buffer would be 200 feet for a deep shank broadcast application, and that it would be one option under the proposed mitigation? So,
first of all, I want to say this is my 4th trip up here. I've been up here 4 times in front of you. And I have yet to leave here and feel like you guys are actually helping communities. And I'm really a person that wants to help communities. And, my name is Manuel Bustamante from Ventura, California, and I'm speaking on behalf of the farm workers. We've had different gentlemen come up here and ladies talk about the jobs that I don't understand how these people can come up here and talk just about jobs without talking about the danger that the farm workers and the communities where this stuff is being used can be visited on. You know, we had a drift earlier this year. All the statistics and all, about how much tax money and all that didn't help those people one bit. So what I would be asking the DPR here is to, first of all, when we talk about pesticides, we've got to talk about them as them being a poison. We can't talk about them being a pesticide and a fumigant and all that, because they are a poison. The definition of what those chemicals are, is a poison that is made to do harm. And these poisons are being sprayed in communities, being sprayed where the farm workers are working, and yet nobody talks about that. The only one that talked about that was the nurse. And everything she said was 100% right. You guys gotta start thinking about the people, the communities, and the farm workers before you go ahead with any decision. Those should be your main consideration. Communities and the farm workers. And then you can take it from there. Then I think you could be more honestly on your decisions if you start with the safety of the farm workers and the communities. We still have a problem with notification. How long have we been talking about notification to you? We've been talking, I remember the last time we were here, we talked about notification. Has anything been done? Has there been any steps to get the notification program put on paper? I don't think so. So that was what, we were here 7, 8 months ago. We were talking about that. We were in front of you, Val, and we brought people to testify to what it is, and yet there's no word of these people. You got to start thinking about that first. The communities and the farm workers. And also, when I speak of pesticides, I'm going to call them poison, and you're going to see me a lot until this thing gets fixed. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Maya Flores. I'm from Fresno, California. I'm the daughter of field workers, masters and bachelors in linguistics, and we also do studies now and then with the scientific method. So I think it's interesting that a lot of people are bringing up the efficacy of pesticides, but they're talking about the immediate profit without taking into consideration other variables such as the healthcare costs of the field workers who are being poisoned, and also the cost of future lawsuits against DPR, against Dow, against the growers themselves for poisoning my ancestors, my relatives, my community members. Those will happen at some point in the future. And now is a good time to put yourselves in check before we take it to that legal process. People are saying that there's no alternatives. There's a thing called regenerative agriculture that says you don't even need pesticides half the time. You can do polycropping, you can do crop rotation, you can do cover crops. All of those naturally disperse pests, all of those lower pesticides, the need for pesticides, and none of those are being enacted in the Central Valley, except of course by cannabis growers, ironically, who have a better ag system than the Central Valley food agricultural system, which is pretty shameful, if you ask me. But I think if you really take into consideration the costs, the future costs that we will bring onto you, as well as the health costs and the deaths of our community members, you should probably regulate this pesticide better, if not ban it outright. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Olivia Medina, and I'm here representing Líderes Campesinas and BC CAPS. I'm going to talk about my experience as a child. I am a daughter of farm workers, and I grew up in the middle of a field, so I can tell you of everything that I saw and lived. And nobody's talked about our farm workers that are the most that are being harmed. So you're talking about pounds and feet and distances and all this. You know, most of our people don't know about that. A lot of them don't even read or speak English. You know, so how do you explain, you know, that they are being harmed when they go out there and, you know, work so they can bring food on the table. All I know is that I grew up in the middle of a field, and my dad used to get up every morning very proud to go and work for his family, to provide for his family. And years later, when he retired, he found out that he had stomach cancer. He suffered with it for 15 years. he had a battle until he lost it. I cannot name you how many family members have died from some type of cancer. I've had a miscarriage when I was 7 months. And so, I mean, it all comes down to, I mean, what other explanation do you need that this pesticide is killing our people? Nobody's talked about the ones that do the hard work, the ones that take out the plastic, or when, you know, when all this, the process is being done. You don't tell me, you're gonna tell me that they're not being exposed to this chemical? So I'm just here for you to at least think about our farm workers, because they are being exposed, and at the end to what leads to what, to some kind of disease or to death, that brings you to death. So I'm just here to talk as my experience as a child, what I saw, and now I know that all these people, you know, do not know that they were being exposed and their lives are in danger.
Muy buenos días, los tengamos todos.
Good morning for everyone.
En Dios confío y en pocas palabras yo pueda decir los efectos.
I have confidence in God, and hopefully I can say what I want to say in a few words.
Las organizaciones de líderes campesinas y de y luchamos por mucho tiempo sobre los pesticidas, pero ahora yo no vengo.
Workers of the field organized. We've worked against pesticides for many years now.
Pero ahora yo no vengo a hablar sobre ellos, ¿verdad? Sino que vengo a hablar sobre el idioma de las frutas.
But I don't come to talk about that today. I want to talk about the language that fruits talk.
¿De qué sirve que los tomates sean tan hermosos si son bofos por dentro? No tienen venas y poca semillita.
What good it is to have beautiful tomatoes from the outside, beautifully looking, red, shiny, and in the inside they're not good.
La cáscara es dura, la cáscara del tomate. No se diga la de los limones también, que pura crece y no tienen nada de agua. Y son hermosos también.
Same for lemons, same as for tomatoes. They look beautifully from the outside, but in the inside they're no good.
No se diga de también las fresas. Ya ve qué hermosuras de fresas. Las de antes eran chiquitas, pero eran bien dulcitas. Pero ahora son grandes, insípidas y ácidas.
Same from strawberries. Before, strawberries were small, they didn't look that great. Now they're big, shiny, they look delicious, but they're not. They're not as delicious as the old ones were.
Entonces así también nosotros nos ponemos hermosos, gorditos, galanes, ¿verdad? Pero pues estamos débiles, nos duelen ya las coyunturas, los brazos, la espalda. Somos una generación.
Same for us. We look really nice and chubby and well-fitted, but we have pains in our articulations, we have diseases in the inside.
La vista también, y yo pues vengo a hablar sobre los efectos de eso, porque para nuestro futuro, nuestros jóvenes, podamos eliminar un poquito qué solución podemos tener para que no nos pase como esta generación que se está terminando.
So I come and talk on behalf of the new generation, the young guys that are following behind our steps. We don't want them to suffer the same things we have suffered with these poisons.
Sí necesitamos de algunos científicos que se preocupen de al tiro para que miren la clase de sangre que tienen la generación pasada con la sangre juvenil que va a haber ahora, para ver qué nos está afectando.
So we need two scientists to help us, to examine us, take some blood tests and compare the blood we had before and the blood of the young people and how the pesticides can affect that.
Porque yo también trabajé en el campo y lo que me saqué fue la resequedad de mi piel. Entonces estamos quedando como la momia de Guanajuato.
Because I worked many years on the field and what I got was this horrible dry skin. I'm like the mummy of Guanajuato.
Mi nombre es Rosario Castañeda, residente del condado de Ventura.
I come from Ventura County.
Y yo solamente quería dar un testimonio, ¿verdad?, en mi persona, que no miran lo rojo, no es porque sea rosadita.
And I come to present myself as a walking testimony. This red that you see in my face is not because I'm a red-faced person.
Es una bacteria que contraje el 99% de los pesticidas.
It's a bacteria I got 99% from pesticides.
Trabajé desde 1998 en el campo hasta el 2016.
I worked since 1998 on the fields until 2016,
De profesión fresera.
picking up strawberries.
Y esto me recuerda que seré, que fui y soy y seré campesino.
This reminds me that I was, I am, and I will be a field worker.
Y eso es lo que me quedó del trabajo de trabajar en el field.
And this is what I got after so many years of hard work on the field.
Y gracias por escucharme y gracias por las pocas personas que hay interesadas.
And thank you for listening to my testimony, and thank you for the few people that are interested on workers.
En las pocas personas que hay interesadas en ayudar a los campesinos.
The few people that are interested in helping the field workers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Diane Zuniga. I'm a community activist, artist, organizer. I come from Merced County, Oxnard, California specifically. Before anything, going into any of the pesticide work, I want to address the fact that I had to drive 6 hours here to address you guys. My community and many communities that are actually affected by these pesticides are brown and low-income communities that cannot afford to make the trip and or miss work. So I miss school and I miss work to be here because I think it's that important. I would like to highlight that for you guys because it would be in our interest and in your best interest to show up in the locations where people are actually affected. A lot of people I see here are suits, and you know, it would be great to have the people that could show up and testify the way that these beautiful women did, because we are not numbers, we are people, and we are dying.
Well, Diane, we're glad that you're here, and that's why we're going to have workshops around California.
Awesome. I really look forward to getting one of those in my community. I'm going with why I am here. So this pesticide that we're here to do is airborne. It travels in the air. I read buffer zones. How do we control the air? I think that's a good question. How do we make sure that there's no people getting exposed to this directly with the work and the children? 12 million pounds of, Telone, because I have a hard time pronouncing, is being spread per year, 12 million pounds per year. It's the third heaviest used pesticide in California. That's big numbers. It's really drift prone and it's hazardous. It's only one of its kind in this pesticide. I want to know why copropos just got banned, right? Like we're celebrating that, and now we're here again. I think it's time to move past what we're actually using, because there will always be the next one and the next one and the next one. These fumigants are killing us, and I think it's time to look into proper regulation, but also maybe the termination of some of these pesticides, because I don't want to keep coming back here every 7 or 8 months to discuss how this new pesticide or fumigant is poisoning me the same way that the last one was. I think that these conversations are, I'm 26 now, I started doing this kind of work when I was 15, sir. I am shocked that in that time frame, I have only been able to get Copair Plus banned. And that was with a lot of hard work. Maybe you guys remember my face, maybe you don't. I hope that you do, because I'm gonna come back every single time and continue to let you know that I am not content with my people dying. You guys are up here, you know, and work really hard for your positions, I'm sure, but there's people on the ground, you know, and I take that, and I hope that you can check your moral calendar and your moral obligation, not only to the profit, but to the people, because without people, there is no profit, and at this point, I'm 100% sure that everybody here understands that your profits are not worth our health. So please, please, please check your morality, because it's a moral problem. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Raul Garcia. I come from a town in the Central Valley called Porterville, California. And when initially I didn't plan on speaking, but looking at the people that came in and spoke in support, you know, frankly, I'm glad that they were all in suits, or at least most of them were. But for me, the concern, you know, it is health, you know. Some likes to be in medicine and stuff like that as well. But one thing that does concern me more, or that concerns me just as much, my bad, not more, just as much, is the long-term effects. How long do a lot of these growers believe that these current agricultural practices are sustainable? You know, I didn't see a whole lot of young people, or any young people, speaking up in support of this. But to the current generation of farmers that are farming right now, what type of baton are you passing on to the next generation of farmers? We always want to talk about leaving, you know, what we're giving to the next generation, to our children, better. How is this better from not trying to seek some sort of alternative, or more urgency to seek not only an alternative, but also integrate the regenerative agricultural processes and practices, my bad, that aren't being discussed. All that's being discussed is the chemicals, numbers, and money. Really, I mean, no one's really saying it, but yeah, money. But what isn't being talked about is the cost to us in the long run. Yeah, you're gonna make some money, and if you're older in age, then I guess you won't live to see the consequences, but I will. Your children will, your grandchildren will, you know, and that's what's scary, because these things are still going on today, and they seem to be getting worse. So for me, it's not a matter of, oh, I wanna take money away from the farmer. No, the farmer isn't the person I'm going after. If anything, I want to put more money into the farmers' pockets, you know? Let's invest in these regenerative agricultural practices, and stop relying so much on these chemicals that when the dust blows, not just with Telone, but with many others as well, with these cocktails, whenever the dust blows, we breathe it in. It's easy if you're a farmer that doesn't live in the area, or if you own the land and you don't live in the area. Yeah, you can look at these numbers and that's all you see, but you don't see the faces and the people that we see, and you don't know the stories that we know. So I don't know how much money is worth it to you, but just know that for every dollar or something that you're trying to save, just know that you're attaching a life to that dollar. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Sarah Aird, and I'm co-director of the statewide coalition Californians for Pesticide Reform, and we work around the state primarily in farm worker communities that are the most affected by agricultural pesticides. And I guess I just want to echo what's been said here a lot already. I think our farming system is actually in crisis right now. We've heard a lot about money and the costs that if certain chemicals are going to be taken away, the costs that exist to farmers. But currently there are, as we've heard, real live costs to people in agricultural communities who are losing their lives. If they're not losing their lives, they have children with developmental disabilities, they have cancer, they're dealing with asthma. There are lifelong consequences that have real economic, real social, real emotional, real psychological costs that are not accounted for in these regulations. I think the thing that and I appreciate that DPR is spending so much time and resources on acute measures and mitigations, and of course that's important. But I would echo what people here have said already, is that this chemical actually needs to be out of California. And I was very frustrated by the slide that says that there are not really viable alternatives. The European Union has banned 1,3-D for a number of years now. It's not used in China to our knowledge. There was a study that came out this year that did a comparison of like some of the pesticides that are used in the United States versus in other areas. So to hear that there's no viable alternative is frustrating. I really appreciated the walnut grower, I will say, and we really want to work together, I think, to support farmers in root resistance. There is regenerative agriculture. There's not just more research that's needed, there's a lot of research that's been done, but I think farmers really need support in technical assistance and financial assistance. And one of the things that I see, because I also come here, as many people do, but from not as far away, is how much resources are invested in developing these models, which are extremely complicated. And I get very frustrated because I want to see the PhDs, the experts, all this money going into alternatives, because there's no reason that agricultural communities and farmers shouldn't have really healthy, wonderful environments where farmers are also able to take advantage of agritourism, and many other opportunities. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today, but would highlight that I think the most important thing for DPR to really thinking about is a bigger change. The mitigations that have been suggested here, we're in support of the most stringent, the biggest buffer zones possible, targeting for all Telone, but really we think the answer is going to be helping farmers and working with farmers to change the system.
Hi, good morning. My name is Bianca Santoyo, and I am a community organizer for Center of Race, Poverty, and the Environment. And I am in the Kern County area, which is one of the largest pound users of Telone. And one of the areas where the high levels of concentration was in the Shafter area, and also part of the 617 steering committee, which a lot of the community members have raised concern of these chemicals being high leveled at presence in their community, and yet nothing has been done. And we're having a lot of frustration in the community because even our ag commissioner has told us if DPR is just sending some recommendations, we do not have to follow through with them. And we really want you to be more stringent on the recommendations for the ag commissioners to comply for the Telone if doing so, and being more restricted when communities that are not using the TARP application. Because as we know in the valley, we're heavily known for the grapes, we're heavily known for the nuts and all that. And it's frustrating to hear that it's the cost of a burden of workers, which is not. It's actually the cost of the burden of the farmers, which is $1 billion industry in the valleys, the Central Valleys. And we were gonna bring us a resident from Shafter. She's part of the 617. And she could not come because she's a caregiver, and her patient just died yesterday of cancer. So you see the correlation between what our community is actually going through as of right now, and yet they're still doing this process, which is understandable. We do understand that it has to go through a whole litigational process to phase out Telone, but you need to see the cost of the burden of the communities and how they're suffering. Telone was a replacement of methyl bromide, which it was a chemical a long time ago, that was done a long time ago. Until now, we're using Telone, another carcinogen that is affecting our community, and we need to do something to phase it out, and we really need to work with the communities. And right now, we heard about the notification. We're open as a community members to work on the 617 as a notification, but we want to see if, as a community, as residents, we want to be part of that notification process, and Telone being one of the primary emphasis in the notification. So, thank you.
My name is Jesus Mendoza, and I come out from Fresno County. Also, before I went to school, my folks live out in Merced County, and they also do small farming production. So the idea that we come here today is the understanding that our residents from Parlier have been surprised knowing what they're being exposed, but not understanding that why and how and who made the decision for them to be impacted in that manner. It seems to be the constant narrative for many of us in the valley, that we're constantly being, I guess, put before profits. I don't think that I would be concerned about a brand or a product going out of existence when our health is actually being diminished, dehumanized. And I think it's something that we definitely need to address and treat people as people, not as some kind of animal. I think that the slave days are over. I think that we have to start looking at folks who live in those communities. If you go to Parlier, where we have the 110 PPB, now you'd understand that the families live right next door. And this is not only do they go and work out in the fields, they come and live in the fields. They eat and sleep in those houses next to the fields. So there's folks that would want to come here, but they say, when will we get the space to come and learn about this? I mean, there should be more engagement, more education, and more asking them their opinion, not just having some folks from some company saying that the brand and their product and their profits are more important than that. But that being the case, also speaking to some of our small farmers who we have in the valley, for example, Marc Castañon, who wasn't able to come here because he's trying to work with the alternatives stuff. There's something that is going on in his crops, and he's been trying to figure out what's attacking his crop for the past 3 days. He was planning on coming here, but he's also a graduate from Fresno State, and he's one of those faces of the new wave of farmers that they're looking forward to alternatives. And by the way, he plays fifth in soils, and this is one of the things that's a big interest to him. As well as a new generation of farmers, which include Hmong, Latino, and African American farmers. So we definitely, as young farmers, including myself, my family, my brothers, we are looking for technical assistance. We're looking for engagement, but we're also looking for space where we can convene and exchange ideas, knowledge. People like the young generations like Mark, who's done a lot of work in ag at his young age, and even having gone and competed in Brazil, representing the United States. We need to put this talent and leadership to the space where we can bring that change. Thank you very much.
So I'm Gabrielle Ludwig. I'm with the Almond Board of California, but I'm also here as a consultant to the Almond Alliance. And just a reminder, so there are over 7,000 growers of almonds, and you may not believe me or not, but this is NASS data. Over 75% of those growers are 100 acres or less. So we're talking about a lot of small acreage growers within the broader industry. And I think the other thing to think about is everybody's been talking about the farm worker community, but you also have the farmer community. They live in the same places as you're talking about with the farm workers. They're talking about their families, their livelihoods. So I just want to be clear that we're all in this together. It's not just either or. A couple of things about why use soil fumigants. I think you heard it a bit from the Walnut folks. At the end of the day, we really don't know what's going on in the soils. Those of you who spoke about regenerative ag, I was on a call earlier this morning, yes, 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. this morning, where someone was talking about doing assessments of soils for microbial populations, what kind of microbes are down there. And they said, this with DNA technology, over 60% of the microbes, we have no idea what they are. You can't do IPM, you can't do more nuanced pest management unless you really understand the biology of the pest or the disease, and then be able to tweak the system and the ecosystem that goes with it. So I just want to be very clear, there's a reason why growers have been very dependent on these tools. It's because measuring things in the soil biologically is very, very difficult to do. We've just started to get some new technologies with DNA, but it's not yet to the point that we have very nuanced detection tools, let alone ability to know when is something gotten to the point of being bad enough that we need to do something or not. So just be very clear that that's part of the reason why this is a much more complicated conversation than for some of our other traditional pesticide issues. And coming back to some of the other things to think about is when we do trials, the Illinois Board funds research, when we look at what happens when you don't use the fumigants, and we've been funding a lot of research, I'll get into that in a minute, I mean, you do see either tree losses or slower growth of trees. That means you're using the resources, yes, less wisely that go into it, the land, the water, the people. By the way, those trees store carbon while they're growing. The better they grow, the more carbon they store. So again, my point here is that we have trade-offs to deal with. It's not just an either or, and the point of CDFA's, DPR's job, and their mission is to balance those risks with those benefits of pest control tools. It's not an either or. So I'm going to come back to some of the things that we've been doing in the almond industry. We have 3 categories of issues that we deal with: replant disorders, we have 3 different types of nematodes, and we have ochre fungus. Each have different issues, different reasons for using, and I'm nowhere near done. My big point is the almond growers, through the Almond Board, have invested more than $5 million in research, trying to better understand what can we do about it. That includes looking at genetics. The fastest way we could get out of this is if we had resistant rootstocks. Do you know how long it takes to develop a resistant rootstock? With current traditional breeding technologies, 20 to 30 years. So for those of you who want to work with us on finding and using the current modern tools to develop those genetics faster, and we can get out of some of these boxes faster.
I'm Tutui, and I'm from Visalia, Tulare County. This is my first rodeo here. Through the years, I woke up at 3:30 this morning, and I ain't good. I ain't feeling good. Been throwing up. Just down and out. Ain't feeling good. That don't happen to me too often. Coming here, I was here yesterday. Back again today. I don't know if it's from exhaustion, low energy. I can't say. I do know that through the years, spiritually I'm sick. Spiritually I'm sick, and it makes me sick mentally. Makes me sick physically. Makes me sick emotionally. Having to come back over and over and over. When's enough enough? My question. When is love enough? And yeah, we might all love our plants, and we may all love our food products, and we all may love whatever that may be, whatever you love. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, maybe even your neighbor. Maybe even your neighbor. I'm a simple man. I live a real simple life. I complicate it. I do complicate it. Only because I know that other people have struggled countless years for some type of justice, some type of protection. My understanding is DPR has a role in that. Protecting me. So I don't have to come here sick. I have a choice. I do have a choice. I can just stay home. I can stay home, and when my grandson asks me, Grandpa, what got you into this? What changed you, Grandpa? It was in kindergarten when Mary Reese started having an epilepsy attack. They thought. And I seen these kids laughing at her. And it caused a lot of anger in me. That's not good. Not good for us. Thank you.
Good day, I'm Denise Moore. I'm fourth generation owner of a fruit and nut tree nursery here in California. And part of this is there needs to be regulation on chemicals and things that we use. We used to use methyl bromide on our property. We were one of the ones that helped to determine an alternative. That was through Montreal protocols in the UN. But then now we're in this situation, and Fowler Nurseries, my company, is completely open to an alternative. We would love to find that not only for the environment, but for also employees' health. But we have to have an alternative. To be a nursery, we have to be able to certify that our material is clean. For us to be able to sell a tree to a farmer, to an almond grower, anything along that line, we have to certify through the CDFA that it is clean. The only way to currently do that is through fumigation. So with that, we would need some sort of clean fumigant that we can use to make sure our trees are safe. Otherwise, we don't have a business. The growers don't have new trees that they can grow. Furthermore, I'm also the vice chairman of the California Fruit Tree and Nut Tree and Grapevine Improvement Advisory Board through the California Department of Food and Ag. And what we do is we receive a 1% assessment on every fruit tree and nut tree and grapevine sale that is made. And that is a fee that the farmers pay to the nurseries, which has been passed on to the CDFA. This board, this Improvement Advisory Board, then accepts research proposals from researchers, and as long as it fits within the scope of the IAB, the Improvement Advisory Board, we fund research proposals. This would be a project that we would work on to be able to find an alternative. Others have tried in the past, and one that I remember, I've been going to these meetings since I was a kid. One researcher determined that if we put 6 feet of water on our property, we might be able to kill nematodes. Explain to me how that would work. My property is full of hills. My house, I live on property, would be full of water. That would not be an option for us. We need to find an option that would work. So through the Improvement Advisory Board, we would welcome any sort of research proposals. Also with what the Almond Board said, it does take 25 to 30 years to find a new rootstock. Fowler Nurseries, we travel the world finding new ones. We found one for the almond industry that helps with blowover. Of course, unfortunately, it's not one that's great for nematodes, so if somebody does have a nematode issue, it's not a good option for them, and that's where the fumigants come into play. So we do need to find options that would work for all of these, but Fowler Nurseries is willing to help do trials, do whatever needed, and then as long as with the IAB would take research proposals. Thank you very much.
My name is Jean-Marie Pelletier, and I'm going to take Jesse Cuevas up on his offer to request that I not be put on social media, if possible, during this presentation. I'm here today to talk about table grapes. My name is Jean-Marie Pelletier. I'm president of Environmental Solutions Group here in Sacramento. But I'm talking today on behalf of the table grape industry, and I point out that Californians have been cultivating table grapes in this state for the last 200 years. A guy by the name of William Wolfskill planted grapes in a little Mexican colonial pueblo that we now call Los Angeles. Several years after that, in the town of Anaheim, the entire grape industry was wiped out because of the disease pathogen that was at that point called Anaheim disease. We now know it as Pierce's disease. So the district that I represent, which is the Consolidated Central Valley Table Grape Pest and Disease Control District, say that fast, works with the industry and works to control Pierce's disease and the vector that transmits it from two vines, which is the glossy-winged sharpshooter. I brought along some graphic materials to share with the panel. And I would note that I would note that a lot of the speakers, first of all, I want to say everybody who's made a presentation whether you're from a community group or whether you're from the grower group, I would commend you on coming here and going through this process, putting on the suit to impress these guys or otherwise. We're all here to try to come up with a solution, I think, and I commend all of you. I'd like to offer some practical considerations, and in my case, Carl Eisdale talked about the issue of nematodes, but with my interest for the consolidated district, I'd like to also talk about vine mealybug. And I've passed out some pictures to the panel so they could take a look at it. Telone is used to control a wide range of pests and pathogens. We know about nematodes. A few years ago, a new pest came into California known as the vine mealybug, and it just wreaks havoc on the vines. They feed on the fruit itself. They excrete a honeydew that then causes mold to grow in the bunches of grapes, makes them unharvestable. And the bad thing about these little critters, on top of everything else that's bad about them, is they overwinter in the soil. They go down into the roots of the plants. So in those times when we're going to do a vineyard replant, we need to use a material, we need to use a soil fumigant in order to control this pest, to reduce the amount of need to control it later in the season when there are actually workers in the field. So I would ask to put in perspective the issue of this particular pathogen. Let me just say, I know my time is up, but we too would like to work with the department. We have some specific comments about the alternatives that have been proposed. I'd like to take 1 minute more, if I could, to talk about 2 more things. One is moisture.
If I could ask to wait until we have everyone have a first chance to speak.
I could do that. You bet.
My name is Jody DeVorce, and I am with Western Agricultural Processors Association. We represent pullers, shellers, and processors of almonds, walnuts, pecans, and pistachios. I just want to thank the department for putting on this workshop and everybody for their public comments. I think it's super important for everybody to have the arena to be able to voice their concerns, and as we continue to work towards a workable solution, that you're taking everybody's thoughts into consideration. First thing, I'm going to just get into a few specific comments. I want to let the department know how much our association has appreciated the air monitoring network activity and being able to review those reports. That's something that you can see that there's robust sampling, thousands of samples that we look at that, and from that, if you review it, you're able to find that most, if not, it's a very rare occurrence that there is an exceedance over the health screening level. A lot of the times you'll find no detections, and so when we're looking at this one event of the 111 parts per billion, that's something that I want to echo previous comments, that it seems like a logical step when we've had a history of being well below that health screening level, that we have established at 110 parts per billion, that the logical next step seems like focusing on that particular area. If there does seem to be an increase, having a proactive approach of initiating conversations with that community, education with growers, county permit commission, whatever it may be. But rather than jump to a statewide mandate, maybe we can start focusing at a local area and see what needs need to be addressed there. Second point is specifically related to the air modeling. So our association definitely supports the use of the latest and validated science and protocols. We worked with an air modeling or a modeling expert that we work with closely, and one of the points that arose is that the air model or protocol that's a part of the air fume modeling that we're looking at. One point that was brought up was that it's important to understand EPA's meteorological data processing guidance and the importance that it's of using specific meteorological data, and if there is anything that isn't taken into consideration or specific enough, that we could have instances of anywhere from 2 to 4 times the overestimation. And so that's something that our association would just really like to be cognizant of and maybe understand a little bit more, that we are honing in on specific data and regions and taking into those considerations. And then thirdly, to address the soil moisture that was being talked about potential emissions from not high enough levels of soil moisture. I wanted to make sure that the VOC regulations, particularly for the San Joaquin Valley, were also being taken into consideration, where with those, it's really quick note, with those there is mitigation measures that include water treatments as an opportunity to mitigate VOC emissions, and so making sure that that's being noted as we're looking into soil moisture concerns. So,
good afternoon, my name is Adam Vega. I'm the coordinator for the Ventura County Coalition advocating for pesticide safety. I want to say, Mr. Dolcini, congratulations on your appointment. I look forward to working with you very closely in the future. A couple things that I want to point out is, again, some speakers brought this issue to the forefront. This is a press conf or workshop being held at 9 a.m. People had to travel very far. We came last night, got here very early. And as far as language access, that's been an issue that we've been experiencing locally with agricultural commissioners. Lack of a language access plan or a very poor excuse for one. And again, this is in English, no Spanish, but thankfully there's the little, PowerPoints at the end. In the future, I do appreciate that the workshop is being, brought to our communities. That's very helpful. The community thanks you for allowing that venue for us to be part. And I know we're hearing a lot of different names, a lot of different statistics and people. I learned of a guy named, William Wolfskill, but I don't know if any of you remember a guy named Cesar Chavez. I don't know if many of you know of or remember a gentleman named Dr. Robert D. Bullard. He wrote the book Dumping in Dixie, brought about the issue of environmental racism, and I don't know how many of you personally have been a victim of a Title VI civil rights violation. Me and the young woman that spoke before, Diane Zuniga, you can read how our frontline communities, and a better word I think is fence line communities, were impacted, and I have yet to see justice from when Telone was being used like rollover minutes. That's crazy, that's ridiculous. And the fact that that's still taking place, the use of this chemical in our communities is quite disturbing. So this is definitely a personal issue for me. I do want to touch on a couple of things. I hope that DPR continues to clearly communicate their process in the future, so it's clear to residents which decision-making moments are most important. That's why we're here today. And we want to know how many hearings will be presented to us in the future. What will be discussed. We want a roadmap of the process. That'd be very helpful, so we can learn how to effectively interact with the system moving forward. And I ask that we immediately reinstate the former use cap without allowing exceedances or banking. There's a lot of banking done when I was going to high school. No more of that. And we ask that you immediately reinstate the former lifetime average cancer risk level of 0.14 parts per billion, or preferably adopt OEHA's recommended risk level of 0.1 parts per billion. OEHA strongly objected to the change made by DPR. So those are just a couple points that I want to share with everyone in the room and you all today. So thank you.
Thank you for coming. And I do want to follow up that we are intending to publicize the workshop dates for January very soon so that all of our stakeholders know what the opportunities are for engagement in that so that you can plan and adjust. And as we've mentioned, those will be throughout the state. So it won't be the same, everybody coming up to Sacramento for those will be trying to come to communities and to different growers throughout the state.
Good morning, I'm Ann Catton from California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation, and I want to express that we're extremely concerned about the past exposures to 1,3-D to those who live in areas of concentrated use, but those exposures cannot be undone. What DPR can do going forward, I strongly support the focus on developing and implementing alternatives. I think they're closer than some have than some others think they are. But also there's an urgent need to promptly put in place the most protective mitigations that have been proposed. I'll talk about that in a moment. And we also need to keep in mind that the high air levels measured recently in Parlier and Chapter and earlier several times in Merced are likely occurring in other areas that haven't been monitored, other areas of high use, and also could be occurring in between times in these areas since the air monitoring is only conducted once a week. And also the spikes in exposure, high spikes in exposure contribute to increased risk of cancer, and we need to keep that in mind. I appreciate that you're looking at all these different mitigations, and I want to address the ones that we think should go forward. We feel that low permeability TIF tarp should be required for all 1,3-D applications to reduce the emissions. And we recognize it's costly, but the cost will be offset because lower application rates are effective with TIF tarps. And the expense for orchards and vineyards may be high, but it is a one-time planting expense. It's not an every year expense. We, however, have serious doubts about the effectiveness of the alternating strip method that is being considered because of it alternates with untarped soil where things could come up in the air. And at any such method, it needs to be rigorously field tested as well as modeled before it's ever considered to be used. We support the proposal to increase the time for TIF tarps to be on the soil from 9 to 14 days after application to reduce emissions overall, and also it will help protect the tarp remover, the workers who are removing tarps, and reduce VOC emissions. We feel strongly that the 50 parts per billion as a 24-hour rather than a 72-hour average should be used as the acute regulatory concentration for setting buffer zones and duration and maximum application rates.
Hello, my name is Jane Zellin. I'm co-director of the statewide coalition Californians for Pesticide Reform. On behalf of the coalition, I'd like to congratulate Director Dolcini on your new appointment, and we welcome new leadership at DPR, especially on the issue of Telone. And I thank you on behalf of the coalition again. Thank you, for working with Governor Newsom and Secretary Blumenfeld for taking a strong lead on chlorpyrifos. We are extremely glad to see DPR under your leadership taking a proactive approach to mitigating acute exposures to Telone. I wanted to specifically address some of the comments that I heard earlier about the amount of time lead time that's needed for alternatives, and also I believe one speaker referred to it as a DPR's race to regulate Telone. So just a very quick history recap. It's been now 29 years since Telone was banned in California. That ban took effect for 5 years. It was as a result of an exceedance that was experienced in Merced County. It was brought back under pressure from industry, and industry was allowed to have inordinate input into the rules. It was allowed to have oversight over those rules. It was allowed to ignore the rules when it wanted to use even more. As a result of decades of unfathomable deference to industry on the subject of Telone by DPR, under prior leadership, I should add, DPR and Dow lost a lawsuit, and it has now been almost 2 years since they were instructed by a court that their regulation of Telone was void, and the new rulemaking needed to take effect immediately. That's why we're here, and I just want to recollect that this is no race. This has been a really, really long time coming, and communities have been demanding relief for many, many, many years. I also strongly challenge the statement that I saw on an earlier slide that there are no viable commercial alternatives to 1,3-D. This is a chemical that is currently banned in the EU. It is not used in China. Every crop that has been mentioned by the people in this room is currently grown organically without use of this pesticide in California. So I strongly question whether, in fact, almost 30 years since it was originally banned in California, and with all these bans in place and organic growing, that there are actually no other alternatives that exist right now. We believe California should follow the lead of other major ag economies and ban this cancer-causing drift-prone fumigant. Meanwhile, we urge DPR to adopt health protective mitigations to prevent the kind of exposure experienced in Shafter and Parlier. Residents of those two communities are here today to let you know their concerns, and all the other communities where no monitoring is currently taking place. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Angel Garcia, And today I'm here with CPR, California Pesticide Reform, but also with the coalition advocating for pesticide safety. On behalf of CAPS, congrats both of you for your new positions, and we look forward to working with you. Today, I didn't plan on, excuse me, on making a public comment, but as I was listening in on the comments that were being made, a few months ago, I received a call from a community resident, out of the blue, just out of the blue. My number was given to that person. And the person had contacted me because her father had recently passed away because of cancer. And she sent me photos, and in those photos, because I asked what makes you think that pesticides had to do with the cancer, definitely would want to help out. And one of those, a lot of those pictures had 3D in them. And she recalls how her dad would not feel well after a day's work. But more importantly, it's the frustration, the frustration with not being able to do something about it at the time that this happened. It was too late. Her dad had contracted cancer and he had passed away. And what did she do? What is she supposed to do now? She cannot bring her father back. This is something that I feel should not be happening in our state, and I'm hoping that with your leadership, with robust health protections on this fumigant, that I don't get any more of those calls. I'm also here as a father. I have a 1-year-old baby. His name is Anubi, and also have another baby on the way. And we are always worried as we drive by or we visit family members, friends. We go to the parks. We always drive by the fields, walnuts. We drive by vineyards. And it's always in the back of my head. I need to leave this area. It's not safe for my family. And so, but it brings forth the question of what sort of future and legacy do we want to leave behind? And that's a question that I really would ask all of you here today. What sort of legacy do you want to leave behind? On chlorpyrifos, it looks very good, but we also should not be coming back on another fumigant that is cancer-causing, and our family should not be put at risk. I should not have to come here and fear for the health of my family, of my 2 babies. I should not have to go through that. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Gloria Apodaca. I represent California Citrus Mutual, a trade association that represents over 2,000 citrus growers throughout the state. On behalf of our growers, some who wanted to attend today but couldn't because the harvest season is kicking off this week, I want to communicate some of their concerns about the process going forward. So our growers fumigate as a last resort. It costs over $1,000 per acre, and this is only done when required. So samples are taken for nematodes and pathogens prior to any fumigation applications. And these applications, if they are made by commercial applicators. Tarping for growers would be cost prohibitive and would add unnecessary burdens to already strained finances. Estimates of tarping could be in excess of an additional $1,300 per acre. This would be on top of the already $1,000 per acre for the cost of fumigation treatment, and that would more than double the cost. And just to develop a new citrus orchard, it costs $15,000 an acre to develop. So our growers are currently working through some of the most stringent restrictions with 1,3-D. Counties are very active in pre-site inspections, ensuring moisture and site buffers, application, personal protective equipment, training, and depths of application are all followed. No effective pre-plant alternatives are currently available. Post-plant alternatives are suppression at best and still run the risk of losing an entire orchard at those very high costs. We look forward to working with you as the process moves forward.
My name is Sarai Martinez. I am with the Coalition of Californians for Pesticide Reform and also with Safe Ag Safe Schools, which is a coalition of farm workers, teachers, retired nurses, I mean, you name it, in the Central Coast, Santa Cruz and Monterey County. I also was not planning on speaking, but I do want to acknowledge first that our communities are celebrating the fact that chlorpyrifos, we're down one organophosphate, and that is to celebrate. Because that means that the health of our community has been put in, again, as a priority, at least for that one pesticide that we've been fighting for many, many years. I'm a daughter of farm worker families. My parents work in the raspberry and strawberry fields, so I'm deeply, again, like, we depend on the labor in the products of the land, and also at the same time we're looking forward to have an agriculture that works for everyone, that works for the soil, that works for the health of our communities that work there, but also that lived and work around the fields. We know that Telone is a fumigant, it's highly drift prone, there's not enough protections. And it's, as I dive deep and learn about the Telone and the history, it's really, really concerning about how, a government agency has been working with an agricultural, in an industry that is not taking care of our communities. But at the same time, I'm hopeful that something will happen, something will be different. And I'm really looking forward to see what's coming, especially because we have created this situation right now. I think some of the speakers mentioned this is a very complex issue of finding alternatives. We know there are alternatives because there's organic farming, there's regenerative agriculture happening, but we have created this. We have created resistance pests that it's difficult to control, that are new, that are more resistant, that we need to include and add more pesticides. We have created this hole, so there's an opportunity for now to leave and really escape from this practice that is not working and will not work. Something that has not been mentioned a lot here is it's a lot of the buffer zones that we have are not enough, especially within the fields. As a community organizer, I hear a lot of stories of people, little kids with brain cancer, people dying from cancer, and a lot of the times farm workers don't even report this. While working, when we say like let's leave the tarps for 5 days, I hear so many stories of farm workers saying, well, the foreman or the supervisor do not respect the signs. Those signs have no date, no time when they was applied. There's so many like lies about when the application happened, taken about before that. I mean, we have a flow system and we need to fix it. So I'm really looking to see what the solution that we have and really put our community's health as a number one priority and really asking you all to think about your legacy and what you're leaving us behind, not only in our health, but also in the health of the soil.
Thank you. My name is Jean-Marie Pelletier. I'm here talking about table grapes, and I'd like to give some practical responses to some of the alternatives that DPR has suggested. But I'd like to also mention and embellish a little bit on the points that were raised by Renee Pinnell and some others. We have one ppb exceedance. And so we're at 111 in Parlier. I think it would be important to investigate specifically what happened there. We know lots of things can happen in the field. A hose can break, a tarp can blow off. We don't know if that was a tarped or untarped application, frankly, at this point. We don't know if it was an application that was, if you look at the proximity, what we're looking at really was more like application site monitoring than ambient air monitoring. So we'd like to understand more about that and have mitigations that specifically address the things that led to that exceedance down there. But I'd like to talk about, from the grape perspective, the two most important applications that we make are deep shank broadcast and deep shank strip. And so we were interested in the proposal that was put forth on September 11th from Colin Brown to Edgar Vidria, this idea of alternating covered strips. We don't know anything about the efficacy of that application, but we would be interested in working with you on that. It would obviously be more expensive, but we'd be interested in taking a look at it and seeing how that might work. The issue of soil moisture is a huge problem. At 70% soil moisture, we don't even irrigate to 70% soil moisture. So moving the shank through the field, going in afterwards with a cultipacker and trying to cover up the shank marks, if we're using a cultipacker and going in with a soil seal as an alternative to using a tarp. If we're dealing with clay soils at 70% moisture, we can't do that. And so I think we need to talk about what's reasonable. The current standard is that it clumps up, it becomes a loose ball in the hand, and so we'd like to talk with you about that because we really don't think putting that in place is feasible. Final point I'd like to raise is California is leading the nation in the concern about single-use plastic straws. Think about it for a minute. Are we going to talk about having plastic all across the San Joaquin Valley that we then have to come up with ways of recycling with the restrictions that they're now on recycling? Is that really a direction we want to go? I think we need to understand there are other alternatives, and maybe we could look at ways to make alternatives, the water seals, the cultipacker, and other kinds of alternatives to the use of tarp more effective.
Again, Ann Catton, California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. And to continue, we think that the 55 part per billion as a 24-hour value is needed as the acute regulatory limit, because to account for extrapolating from animal data, because the effects in test animals were only measured at 3 days and could have occurred earlier, and also because the animals were only exposed 6 hours a day. We think fumigation should continue to be prohibited in December, but also in other times when stagnant air conditions are predicted, as has been recommended by ARB in the past. We support capping the application block to 40 acres or possibly even lower, and recognize that your analysis has shown that in part of the year there was a very large application block untarped.
Aren't hearing the people that are coming up here and talking about what this poison is doing to the people of the communities that they get sprayed on. And if they could come up here and talk about their money, but also talk about the people, then that would be another thing, but they don't. It's their most concern is their bottom dollar. And again, money doesn't talk, it swears. Here's a good example.
Bueno, pues les voy a robar otros minutitos más para dar una idea o un ejemplo. Yo soy de la ciudad de Guatemala.
So I'm going to talk a few more minutes so that you can understand better. I'm from Guatemala City.
Los 23 departamentos tienen, los 22 departamentos son indígenas.
All 22 states in Guatemala are indigenous states.
Y cada pueblo tiene su petróleo, le dicen petróleo de oro.
And each town has its own oil. They call it gold petroleum.
Estos indígenas, o sea que ellos alimentan sus tierras, sus parcelas.
So these indigenous people, they feed their little pieces of land.
Hacen sus quemas de todo el chiribisco, o sea, los palos secos.
They burn the land to burn out those little weeds and stuff.
Todo lo juntan en medio del campo que van a sembrar.
They put it all together in the middle of the field that they're gonna seed.
Y lo queman.
They burn it.
Y le llaman la quema del diablo.
They call it the devil's burn.
Además, ellos mismos van a vender a los mercados de la ciudad.
And themselves, they go take their crops and go sell it at the closest town or city.
Y todas las hojas, o sea, pues de los desperdicios de las frutas y o sea, hojas del elote o los elotes, o sea, toda esa basura la recogen.
And all the, let's say, trash, let's call it that way, of the fruits, the leaves, the little stems, they get all that together.
Y se la vuelven a llevar a sus pueblos y ahí la entierran.
And they take all that, let's call it trash, back to their little land, and they bury that on the soil.
Ahí en tierra. Yo no sé si será porque el suelo de nosotros es húmedo.
I don't know, it's because the soil down there, it's very humid.
Pero tengo otra idea también, en que yo trabajé cuidándole a 2 niños a una señora, y esta señora tenía su lavadora afuera.
And I don't know if it's the case, but I work for this lady taking care of her 2 child, and this lady had her clothes washer outside of her home.
Y ella lavaba su ropa con unos productos, o sea, pues de orgánicos.
And she washed her clothes with some organic products.
Y esa agua se la echaba a sus plantas.
And the water that came out of the washing machine, she put it on top of her plants.
Pues ella tenía sus plantas bien verdes, bien bonitas y todo.
And those plants were very green and very beautiful.
Y sin ninguna contaminación.
With no contamination.
Ahora yo lo hice con la señora donde yo vivo, tiene su jardín, y yo lavo la ropa con esos aguas orgánicas, y vea qué bonito tiene su jardín también.
And I do the same up here. I wash clothes where I work with these organic products, and then I take that water and irrigate with that water the plants, and the plants are very healthy and very beautiful.
Mi idea era de que esas aguas, que si lavamos con esas aguas orgánicas, se las podemos echar a los campos.
So my idea is that if we wash with these organic products, we can use that water to irrigate our plants and crops.
Hi, that's Kathleen Kilpatrick again. I didn't really plan on coming back, but some questions came up in my mind after listening to all the other speakers. I spent many years as a nurse and midwife before that, and translating information into understandable language is something that nurses, it's part of our job. And I found that the way the risks are communicated and all those numbers and all that, those are things that people are having a hard time understanding. Certainly, even with my background, when I looked at the risk characterization document in the slideshow, I had a hard time figuring out how those numbers were derived and what they really meant. So when you go out to these communities, you need to get some help from somebody with a healthcare background to figure out how to translate that. It is gratifying that people from the industry are saying we're really looking at alternatives. The human health health consequences are part of that, but the other part of that, as many people brought up, is the environmental consequences of fumigation specifically and our methods of agriculture in general. And certainly the issue of plastic is a big one. We live in a heavily plasticized valley where berries are covered with arches and it's on the ground too. Those are all things to consider. So I'm really curious about what DPR's role is in looking at the big environmental picture of fumigants in particular and the way agriculture is done and how we can actually get to more restorative and regenerative methods and how that can be incentivized and legislated and worked on so that when we're working on human health consequences, we're also looking on environmental consequences. And I really don't know what DPR's role is in that, but it would be nice if there were some way that you could look at that more, you could talk about it more, because that's certainly a very large component of what we're all asking for, which is environmental justice. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jesus Mendoza again, and I'm with the Central California Environmental Justice Network, but also I am also part community member, farm worker. I was a farm worker, so was my family. So just coming from a perspective, and I think the gentleman, I'm not sure his name, but I think Manuel, mentioning that understanding which side is on what side, thinking what's more important, just comes and hits me hard. Because it seems that that's the thing that we're struggling against, is that we are valued less than the profits. But just in terms for understanding for us in the Fresno area as farm workers ourselves, understanding, and this is according to even a conservative figure by the Nisi farmers. So about 92% of the farm workers in the larger Fresno area are undocumented. These are undocumented migrant, immigrant people, farm workers. The idea is to understand how much access we have to health care. None. There is none. When the conservative people found out that people in the Fresno area had access to Medi-Cal, emergency Medi-Cal, that was actually intended for indigent folks, homeless people, they threw a fit and they discontinued that. So for us as undocumented farm workers, as a community itself, we don't have access to health care. We don't have access to information. You know, as much as you're concerned about the profits, yeah, for us, unfortunately, we're thinking about how to make a dime to pay the rent. And it's unfortunate that we're looking at this. But the idea also, I want to make a comment towards the point about leadership. Thank goodness California is not like the national leadership. And I thank you for taking that step forward in protecting people's life, people's health, our health. The idea is, I'm grateful that our governor is stepping up and showing, leading by example, being a champion of the environment, not such, and understanding that when industry makes the rules, people come last. So it is important that we continue striving forward and working together. The idea is that we're not even asking for the extremist solutions. We're asking for people to come together and allow us that space of working together. So in that sense, I just want to make sure that people understand. Us in the community, we're not against farmers. Not at all. We're with farmers. But we are against those thuggish pesticides that are taking away our health and the life and the future of our children, of our elderly, and our pregnant mothers. So, thank you.
Gabrielle Ludwig again with the Almond Board of California and consultant to the Almond Alliance, just to finish some of my comments. And again, in reflecting on what I've been hearing today, there's been a lot of talk about what kind of agriculture do we want for California. I actually had hoped to be down in San Luis Obispo to talk about whole orchard recycling today, not talking about Telone. So I just want to let you know from the almond industry's perspective, we are looking at what's the future of agriculture in a whole bunch of different ways, including regenerative agriculture. But coming back to the research program, I just want to be clear, almond growers, this is almond growers' dollars. There's been a lot of talk about money. This is growers spending money, their own money, on research. It's been over $5 million in the last 15 years. And that's including looking at understanding the biology of these pests better, trying to find better ways to monitor for it, seeking ways to reduce the off-gassing, which is the conversation DPR is actually trying to have today. I will say we need to go back and look at our research, but we've looked at water seals, we've looked at different tarps, including TIF, we've looked at biochar, talking about regenerative ag. So there's different ways we can look at it. We need to go back and look at the data and see, you know, what can we bring to the table. Just, this is the beginning of the conversation. We haven't had time to give you the answers you're looking for, but just to let you know we're working on it. We've also been looking at non-fumigant alternatives. I know the Walnut Board has been doing something similar, so in addition to the genetics, which as I pointed out earlier is really the fastest way, the most consistent way we could get out of some of these soil pest management issues. We've been looking at, you know, can we do anaerobic soil disinfestation, we've tried steam treatment. So far, none of those things are ready for prime time. I'm not saying they can't be used in some places, but they will not work for everywhere. But I want to be very clear, the almond growers, with their own dollars, have been working to look at how do we find other additional new ways to manage soil pests. So we don't have the answers right now. And having said that, we will continue to work with, well, I should also say that I've been around the soil fumigant issues for quite some time. There's been less funding for soil pest management at the federal level. We've been losing skill sets at the universities here. We're losing the skill sets we're not having the right support for our farm advising community. So I come back to how do we also get the investments we need to help growers do things differently that everybody else there seems to think we're doing everything wrong. We don't necessarily agree with that, but we're still trying. So again, how do we do that with the current resources and at the same time develop the data that's necessary to help DPR make the best decisions that they can. So we'll work with you and we'll work with anybody who will work with us on trying to find solutions. Thank you.
Hello, Christy Toronto again from Salinas SAS, Safe Ag, Safe Schools. And I just wanted to mention the fact that I love almonds. I love, and I eat a lot of nut butters. And I also shop a lot at Costco, which now has the largest amount of organic products in all of the nation. And they're affordable and they're accessible. I don't want to see that the industry, the growers go. I don't want to see farming go from California. I grew up in Salinas, very proud that, you know, just as a young girl, that we fed the world. We were the salad bowl, and that was really amazing for a young aspiring girl who went to a Catholic school that played Mary in the play, you know, and so the idea of nurturing the whole world was great, you know. But I think that we have to get our priorities straight, and the fact that we heard that this has been banned for 30 years, this is already has been spoken to as a done deal. And what I do, and what I'd encourage others, I live very well without non-organic strawberries, and I live okay without, when I can't get organic nut butters, I don't eat nut butters. You know, it might just come down to either or, but yet I think that we can work together, we can find ways that everybody wins. Farming doesn't have to go. We as consumers can get what we need and protect the children and the farm workers. I think that there's a way to do that, but I'm amazed that this has been banned for 30 years, and it's still, you know, the recent, there's in the news today, the woman who embezzled the university got 14 days, and the homeless woman that changed the zip code so her child could go to a better school got 5 years. So I think we have to look at this complex question, and not just with the idea of making money on it or being right. We're going to have to find a way.
Thank you very much for having this workshop hearing, and for, first of all, I'd like to say my name is Margaret Sedna Bonetti, and I've come from Salinas. I'm a former school board member, and I'm also very involved in my community on many issues, especially with farm worker families, communities of color, and a whole array of issues. I didn't come here, I came here to listen, thinking it was going to be a different type of a workshop. I didn't plan on speaking, but I think I should. So I'd like to first say that living in Monterey County, you know, Monterey County is a place where it's the upside down river. So the water flows kind of the opposite way from the beginning, one side of the valley, and it goes all the way out, and it goes out into the ocean. And then we have the wind currents that go in the opposite direction. So it's kind of like this thing. We know that chemicals don't stay where they're placed. We know that they travel. We know that this is sort of a quirky science of how much water, how much do we put, how much we don't. It's unsure. The one thing that we do know is that this has been banned as a carcinogen in the past. We know that. We also know that when it comes to chemical weapons, there's a history that goes all the way back to World War I, where chemicals were used in order to eliminate your enemies. So this is a history, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about farm workers, but it's not just farm workers, because even some of these people that are here, walnut growers, almond growers, they're all being impacted by these chemicals. So it doesn't just stay with the farm workers, it impacts your families and future generations, unborn children. The autism rates have increased. We know that bees are being affected, bees who pollinate our crops. It's an ongoing cycle. Something that hasn't been mentioned here at all is the effect on the ozone layer. So we're also going through global warming, we're going through massive fires in the state of California. All of these toxic chemicals that go up, as we saw what happened in 9/11, and that how affected years later firefighters and what it's done to this health. We can look at that as a picture as what happens when you take these chemicals and then they get mixed around. We've got fires, we've got everything getting mixed around. California, which leads the way on so many, we've got a very progressive governor. And by the way, congratulations. But we have a very progressive governor. California is known as being progressive. We are very behind on this particular issue. When we're behind the other developed countries on an issue like this, tells me we need to be moving to do something. And this analogy about banning straws, which is great. I don't know, I wasn't quite sure if that meant we should start using this chemical instead of a straw, if we should use the plastic. Maybe we should ban the straw and ban the plastic and ban the chemical. Hey, that would be that takes care of all of that. Everybody took their time, so if you don't mind. Okay, this greatly impacts us, as especially community of colors, as I mentioned. Environmental racism has been brought up. In Salinas, we have schools that are surrounded by agricultural fields, and we've worked hard in order to try to work with the ag commissioner there, and who, by the way, I consider to be a friend of mine and a nice person. But we need to be working together on these issues. I will ask also that these workshops, yes, you take them into all of these other areas, Southern California, Ventura, the Central Valley, up north, up and down, so that everyone has an opportunity to stand here like we have stood here and to speak to this issue. And I will end on this note. This very building that we're in, the Joe Serna building, Joe Serna was my cousin. I'm very proud of that. I come from a family of activists across the board. And he had a legacy of, yes, as someone mentioned, working across the board with everyone. So this isn't a situation where we are we shouldn't be pitted against each other. We should all be working for the same goal. And remember, again, how this affects us. It affects our environment, it affects our ozone layer, it affects health, autism rates, which have skyrocketed and costing our dollars in the state of California, educational dollars, so many of them that are going towards special needs. Yes, this chemical has been banned in the past, it needs to be banned again, and we need to be looking for alternatives that are not suggestions coming from Dow Chemicals. So I will repeat that, Dow Chemicals. If you ask me, who do I trust more? Dow Chemicals or the good people of this state whose health is being affected? It's a non-question, because I am not going to put my faith in Dow Chemicals. So thank you very much, and I'm proud to be here in the Joe Serna building advocating on this issue.
Thank you. So, again, want to appreciate all of you who've come out to participate in this and to share your thoughts and perspectives. We really value the time that you took to come out and the thoughts that you shared. And there's a lot for us to consider and reflect on, and then come back out for another round of workshops next year. So with that, we'll conclude the workshop. And again, thank you for coming. Very much appreciate that.
Karen, I just want to echo the thanks that you gave to the audience. I really appreciate hearing from everybody, from farmers to farm workers. And as someone said, we're all in this together. So, you've given us a lot of food for thought. Your input is very valuable. All of your contributions, those that have traveled long distances, those that traveled from short distances. We all really appreciate the fact that you took time out of your day to come and talk about this very complicated issue with us. And the workshops that we're going to be doing in different parts of the state, and the decisions that we make internally, and the conversations that we have externally, all will feed into what will hopefully be a good, sensible public policy outcome. So I want to thank you again for being here this morning, and I look forward to working with you on this issue.